I don't want no oil, a spoil in my shoreline. I like fish much better than crud. I like birds and things, creeping and crawling. Won't trade no more oil for blood. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that black demon oil's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. I don't want them nukes run by them kooks who think radioactivity is fun. No more three-headed frogs or kids with leukemia. Nuclear power ain't fit for a dog. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that nuclear power's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. No nukes!
Good morning, Toledo, and good afternoon, Columbus, and hello to those of you listening on the internet, wherever and whenever you are. My name is Joe DeMar, and you have tuned into For a Green Future. For a Green Future is a program where we talk about ecology and the environment, and we talk about them in ways that they affect you, your family, your health, your pocketbook. And we here on For a Green Future, we believe that there is going to be a green future, that once we get all this ecology stuff figured out and worked into our society, that we're all going to be healthier and happier and wealthier and better in every way. So this is a call-in show, and we welcome your calls. As we say, this is the best show in Ohio, but it gets better every time you call. And the call-in number is 866-240-1065. 1065. That's 866-240-1065. Call in at any time with any kind of comment or question on any sort of ecological issue. And we'll be happy to talk with you about it, answer any questions, start in any sort of discussion. If you saw a story on the environment this week that kind of stuck with you and it's just been sort of like bothering you, or you've got questions about it, we're very happy to answer that sort of question at 866-240-1065. And this has been a good week for most of us. It is the week of July 4th. It was Independence Day back there on Thursday, and a lot of people have had a lot of time off here, so time to relax and think about some of the bigger questions. It's time to just sort of think about the whole picture that we're in here. And in honor of Independence Day, I've been reading a book called 1776, which is a historical book. It talks about what was actually going on there in the year 1776 when they were having the War for Independence. And it's full of excerpts from people's letters, and people wrote a ton of letters back then. Man, George Washington apparently must have been writing 10 or 20 letters a day based on what the author of this book, 1776, has been putting in there. And it was a very interesting time, and it reminded me of I'm the political director for the Ohio Green Party, although on this show I only speak for myself. I don't speak for the Green Party, and the same for you when you call in at 866-240-1065. But a few years back I ran for U.S. Senate as a Green on the Green Party line, and I went to wherever I was invited, and whoever invited me to speak, I would go and speak there. And I was invited to come address a Tea Party group down there in central Ohio. And one of the things I asked them in that speech, I said, who here has seen in the film Patriot with Mel Gibson? And every arm went up. Everybody had seen it. And I said, one thing that you could see in that movie is that nature is the infrastructure of freedom. because the patriots in that movie, Mel Gibson and his men, they lived off the land as they roamed around fighting the British. And that is true over and over again in history, that if you have a healthy ecosystem, if it can support you, then you can do things like break away from a colonial power that's been controlling you. You have more options when you have a healthy ecosystem. I like to point over in the Middle East there. Now that area of the world has had 2,000 years of quote-unquote civilization, and it's pretty much dead. It's pretty much a desert. It used to be called the Fertile Crescent. It was one of the most fertile places on Earth, literally. But now there's ruins of cities and so forth because they ignored nature. They ignored their ecosystems, or they were ignorant of just how important protecting nature was, and their societies pretty much collapsed. And so now you go over there, and yes, there's lots and lots of people, basically because of the way that we manipulate energy, and they can import whatever they need because they've got oil to sell. But those societies tend not to be free societies, because when there's very little resources, when you have to get everything from the government or from the economic system that you're stuck in, there's a lot less choices, and so people there's a lot less freedom. And one thing I just wanted to take the time to remember, one essential element to the freedom in the United States, one of the reasons that the freedom fighters were able to succeed was because of being able to get their resources, their food, and their shelter from the natural environment. And there's one tree in particular that was sort of a foundation for the United States of America. One tree whose contribution you don't read about in books like 1776, or you don't often hear about it, and that was the chestnut tree. Now, there might be a few people listening who are still old enough to remember the American chestnut. It went extinct back through the 20th century, but the American chestnut tree was an amazing tree. It produced high-quality food, high-quality protein that colonists could go, literally anybody could just go walk into the nearest patch of woods, because the chestnut tree was the most common tree in North America. So you could walk into any patch of woods and walk out again with a bushel full of chestnuts, which you could then roast, and which were very nutritious, very high protein, a lot of good vegetable fats and so forth. And without the chestnut tree, we would not have succeeded in quote-unquote taming North America. And so then of course, what happened was there was a blight. Dutch elm disease came along from an import from Europe, and it just wiped out the chestnut tree. So again, another example of how our economic system can really destroy the natural systems that are the basis of our economy. And another important resource for the soldiers, for the Continental soldiers, were passenger pigeons. Back then, passenger pigeons were still around, and they were literally one of the most numerous organisms in North America. They talk about passenger pigeon flocks that would fly overhead and would darken the sky for literally days at a time. And it's just mind-boggling to us, because we don't usually get to see that kind of abundance anymore. But the soldiers, the Continental soldiers, would, flocks of passenger pigeons would go by. They'd get their guns out, and they'd, fire off, just point your gun straight in the air. You don't even have to aim it. And there's 6 or 7 passenger pigeons would fall at your feet, and there's your dinner, and dinner from some of your fellow soldiers. In fact, the one thing they did mention in this book, 1776, was that the Continental Army was very low on gunpowder in those years. And so George Washington actually had to issue an order telling his soldiers to stop shooting the birds that were flying overhead, because they needed that powder to fight the British. But without those birds, without that support of the natural ecosystems, without that infrastructure that was in place, the Continental troops literally, they almost starved, especially in the winters, but they literally would have starved. They wouldn't even have been able to make it through the summers. And, our armies would have failed because the British were well supplied from the farms of Europe, and, they had their supplies coming in on the ships from the sea, and whereas our soldiers were living off the land. And so without that infrastructure, in 1776, the American Revolution would have failed. So just something to remember, another element to think about in this when you're celebrating the Independence Day, when you're celebrating the 4th of July. And let's see, how did you celebrate the 4th of July? 866-240-1065. Did you go out with your family? Did you watch fireworks? Give us a call and just let us know how you celebrated the 4th of July and what the 4th of July means to you. I went back to visit with my family on my mother's side. They have a family reunion every year on the weekend closest to 4th of July. And they were talking about the past. Basically, my family, my great-grandfather came over from Italy. And our family has stayed pretty much Italian through all the preceding generations. It was only my generation where people stopped marrying Italians and just started marrying whoever we happened to fall in love with. But my great-grandfather, he and his wife, he came over from Italy, and they had 10 children. And the last one of his children just passed away a year ago, my great uncle David. But they would tell us stories about that time as the 10 of them were growing up, and as my great grandfather was providing for everybody. And it was very interesting because Italians at that time were discriminated against incredibly. People would simply just not hire Italians. And nobody thought anything of it at the time. That there weren't class action lawsuits to force people to hire more Italians and to stop discriminating against us. It was just something that we had to work through. And we did end up, now there's very little discrimination against Italians, and I'm grateful for that. And I don't think we should be discriminating against anybody. So that's, my family comes from a perspective where we were discriminated against, and so we have some idea about the evils of discrimination. But one story that gets told every year when we get out there in our family reunion is how my great-grandfather, he did manage to get a job. And he had to walk about 2 miles every day because he didn't have a car to and from work. And he would have to walk along these railroad tracks in the little city where they were growing up. And what he would do is he would take his rifle with him when he went walking to work in the mornings. And then on the way back, whatever he shot on the way back, that was what was the meal for the day. So he could be walking back and he could shoot a couple squirrels, maybe a groundhog. That's what went into the stew. And so in a very real way, a very direct way, the natural world, the natural ecosystems were supporting my family. And it's just a reminder that with all our technology, with all our agriculture, with all our mechanized agriculture, with all the farm chemicals we use and all the huge things, our artificial ecosystems that we're building with those tools are not as productive as the natural ecosystems. And you might say, well, Joe, what do you mean? How is that possible? I mean, every year in the fall we can go past the Andersons, and sometimes you can see mountains of grain, literally hills of wheat that are 100 feet high. I said, how could the natural system be more productive than that? Because look at that. That's tons of grain going into those cargo ships that that go all over the world. And the answer is that model, that monoculture, that field full of wheat, all it's growing is wheat. Whereas in a healthy ecosystem, there's a huge variety of plants and animals all living together and all working together. And so, a healthy ecosystem will produce fruits, it'll produce wood, it'll produce game, it'll produce, a whole range of things. And it produces healthy fish. If the land is clean, then the water is clean, and the clean water is very productive. And so you get fish, you get lumber, you get all kinds of stuff in a healthy, productive ecosystem. And which is not to say we should stop farming. Obviously, we need to keep farming. But our farming needs to more closely mimic the natural ecosystems. The Native Americans basically taught us a lot about agriculture. In fact, one of the things that they taught the settlers, the original colonists, was about fertilizer. I mean, you might remember the story when you were a kid. You might have learned that the Native Americans were the ones that taught the settlers that you put a little fish, you put a little minnow in with your corn as you're planting it. And they were like, oh, wow. And so that actually produces more corn. And so what the natives had was a system. They called it the Three Sisters. It was corn, beans, and squash. And they would plant all three of these plants together. And all three of them supported each other, and all three of them made like a mini ecosystem, because the corn would grow up, and then the beans would use the corn as like poles. They would climb up the corn plants. And so there's the corn and the beans together. And then the squash, they would plant that around the base of the corn, and so the squash would spread out with those big leaves, and they would shade the ground. And so you had a system there. You had the squash, which was shading the ground, so you didn't need to do a lot of weeding. The beans were climbing the corn, and one thing about bean plants is that they're legumes, and so they put nitrogen into the soil. They actually enrich the soil. And corn needs a lot of nitrogen, and so having bean plants with the corn helped the corn grow very quickly. And so then the corn, of course, is one of the main products that they were looking for. And their corn was more diverse than our corn. Our corn has, you go past a field now, and what you see is a pure strain of corn. You see a monoculture, one kind of corn plant. It's got one color. And the Native Americans had literally hundreds of varieties of corn. And they had different varieties that did different purposes. They had some corn that were taken for specific diseases. It was medicinal corn. And then they had other corn. You've all seen Indian corn, which is the decorative corn that we hang on our doors sometimes in the fall, that it has multicolored kernels, and it's like, oh, isn't that pretty? Well, actual Indian corn, quote unquote, the way the natives grew corn, they had really tiny little corn cobs. Others had really huge corn cobs. Some they grew for the starch. Some they grew for, other purposes. And so they had a variety. They had a diversity in their corn crop that we don't have. And so if some disease comes along or some insect comes along that our corn is susceptible to, our entire crop could be wiped out. Or if, for example, like this year, if you have a growing condition that is tough on one strain of corn, then you're in big trouble. Whereas the Native Americans, they had over hundreds of strains of corn, and an insect that might attack one strain might not attack another. And so they had this constant ebb and flow and diversity, and things were always changing. And they, of course, were changing things because all these different strains of corn were the result of direct selection. It was generations of Native Americans looking at the corn crop and picking specific plants to continue to propagate in order to get these 200 different varieties of corn. And so So again, natural ecosystems, and that's the infrastructure. That's the true infrastructure of a society and of freedom, I believe. And this is something to think about when we're talking about freedom, and what exactly do we mean? I mean, we all say we're free, and I believe the United States of America is still a free country. And this is the reason I love the United States of America, is because we have freedom of speech, which I'm enjoying the use of right now, and which I would love to share with you, your freedom of speech. Come on this 4th of July weekend, exercise your freedom of speech. Give a call at 866-240-1065. And it doesn't matter if this is something, if you agree with me or not, I'm willing to talk to anybody. And freedom of speech is one of the most precious freedoms. But we also have freedom of assembly, freedom of the press, freedom of religion. And that, to me, is what makes America great. It's not our tanks and our guns and our bombs. That's not why I think America is a great country. I don't think we're a great country because we have the best weapons and the largest military. That's not what makes us great. What makes us great is what that military is defending, which is the freedom of speech, freedom of religion, the freedom to choose what you want to be or do politically. That's what makes America great. And in fact, without those things, would America be worth defending? Would our country be worth defending if this wasn't a free country? If we were just, let's say, a dictatorship? Could this possibly still be a great country if it was a dictatorship and we didn't have all these freedoms that we enjoy? And I think maybe not. I think if America, without the freedoms that America enjoys, and that means that if someone is free, you have to accept that they're not always going to do things exactly the way you want them done. Without that freedom, America would not be worth defending. That's my opinion. But luckily, we do still have freedoms, and even though right now there's a bill in front of the Ohio House, it's in front of the Ohio Senate, there is a bill, ironically, since we're talking about freedom, it's a bill that would turn protesting, and they call it critical infrastructure. It would turn protesting critical infrastructure into a felony. And so, for example, last year we had this Nexus pipeline, which they forced through the state of Ohio. And in the process, they trampled on the rights of property. They trampled on the property rights of literally thousands of Ohioans, because a lot of farmers, a lot of people didn't want this pipeline to be pushed through their property, especially since this is a pipeline that just carries fracked gas from southeast Ohio, and it carries it all the way across the state and all the way up and around Lake Erie into Canada. So it cuts diagonally across the entire state of Ohio. And this is not gas that we're using to heat our homes. This is gas that one company is exporting out of the ports in Canada. And so this whole project was for the benefit of one company, not for the people of Ohio. And yet they used eminent domain. They trampled on the freedoms of the people who live in Ohio in order to build this private pipeline for a private company, which is now making their own profits off of it. And there were protests along the way. There were people who, sometimes they were private protests on their own land. They would stand there on their own land with signs saying, don't destroy my land for your pipeline. And there's a bill in front of the Ohio Senate right now that would turn that into a felony, so that people would go to prison for 10 years. It would actually make it as severe. It would give it the highest level of felony severity, equal to, let's say, murder. Protesting, quote-unquote, infrastructure. So I think it might be called the Infrastructure Protection Bill or something like that. And so here's an example of the state of Ohio, the Ohio Senate, thinking about literally cutting off one of these freedoms that we've got, the freedom of assembly and the freedom of speech, because that's all a protest is, really. It's a bunch of people assembling together to say something. And so protests are a sign of freedom. Protests are a product of freedom, because if you've trampled on somebody's rights, if you're doing something that people feel are wrong, and they've gone through the process, they've gone to the hearings, they've made their appeals, and yet they're still being allowed to do this terrible thing, then you can take to the streets, you can protest, and that's being used very effectively in Europe right now. There's all kinds of protests going on about climate change, specifically saying that we've got to get off the carbon habit, which we do. But in those protests, people are not being then arrested and sent to prison for 10, 15 years just for protesting they think something that they believe should not be happening. Now, the founding fathers, the people who were in the Revolutionary War, they were literally putting their lives on the line to protect these freedoms. That in letter after letter, in speech after speech that I'm hearing about in this book, 1776, freedom is the thing that the Continental soldiers were fighting for. They were fighting for freedom from oppression, freedom from a colonial power, freedom for themselves and their families, and for us. So the freedom to go out and have a protest, the freedom to go out and say something publicly, that was bought with the lives, with the sacrifice of these soldiers back in 1776 that we're supposed to remember this week. And I think, personally, I've always thought that the best way to honor that sacrifice, the best way to show that you appreciate this gift of freedom that Americans have, is to use those freedoms, is to go ahead and go out and use your freedom of speech, to go ahead and call assemblies of people, to go ahead and get stuff printed in the free press that questions authority and questions when our leaders are doing things they shouldn't be doing. To me, that is the best way to honor those fallen soldiers. I mean, fireworks are great. I love fireworks, but you could shoot off fireworks without having any freedoms. And so the best way to do it is to actually take advantage of it. And I'm offering you the opportunity to take advantage of it right now. 866-240-1065. What do you think? Do you agree with me that nature is the infrastructure of freedom? Or are you like, nah, that's just crazy? Either way, give us a call and we talk to you. Do you have a family story like my family's, where being able to get resources from the land, being able to maybe get some fish, or maybe do you have a family story like that where you were dependent on the natural resources, or some situation where you or your family was dependent on having a healthy ecosystem? Give us a call. I mean, did you have a great grandpa like I did, who literally had to feed his family by hunting? I'd like to hear about it. I think we'd all like to hear about it. So anyway, we're coming up on the bottom of the hour here, and so it is time to hear from our wonderful sponsors. And one of our sponsors of this hour is the Wood County Park District. The Wood County Park District is a natural resources conservation agency. They protect natural spaces, maintain quality green spaces. They provide engaging program that teaches people to love and respect nature, and they restore wildlife habitats and lead outdoor adventures. The Wood County Parks protects 20 parks and nature preserves around Wood County, and they're open from 8 a.m. to 30 minutes past sunset every day of the year. And some of those outdoor adventures are coming up pretty quick here. One is this coming Saturday, July 13th. They're having what they call Self-Care Saturday. And these go from noon to 1:30 p.m. at the WW Knight Nature Preserve. That's at 29530 White Road in Perrysburg. And they are going to teach you about forest therapy. So forest therapy is practicing the connection with yourself and the earth. By practicing this connection, you reduce stress, depression, anxiety, blood pressure, and heart rate, symptoms of OCD and ADHD, and you can increase your sense of well-being. You can boost your immunity, you can increase your mental clarity, and it can boost creativity and your ability to concentrate. So there is a cost for this program. It costs only $15. The program facilitator is Jim Witter, and what you can do is you can register for the program at www.wcparks.org, or you can call the Wood County Park District at 419-353-1897. That's 419-353-1897. And then coming up a little later on in August 23rd, they're having the Hiking for Health series. And those are hour-and-a-half hikes. They go from 10 a.m. to 11:30 a.m., and that's on Friday. And that's going to happen at the Black Swamp Preserve, which is at 1014 South Maple Street in Bowling Green. And then on August 23rd, actually the one on August 23rd, is going to be at Otsego Park. And Otsego Park is at 20,000 West River Road in Bowling Green. And there you could join a naturalist for exercise and the wonder of watching the seasonal changes. The hikes offer a true mind-body connection. Sign up for 1 week or all 3. The leader of this program, again, is Jim Witter. This one is free, but again, you register at wcparks.org, or you can call the Park District at 419-353-1897. The Park District also offers regular opportunities for people to volunteer. And when you volunteer, you can help remove invasive species, or you can help in their greenhouse. And in order to do a volunteer or sign up for volunteering, you go to wcparks.galaxydigital.com. That's wcparks.galaxydigital.com. And so interesting things that the Wood County Parks are offering, and that is a very clear demonstration of sort of the connection between freedom and nature, because we have to remember that the founding fathers, the guys and women back then in 1776, they were living in pretty much what we would consider today to be wilderness. I mean, right now I'm in the book, I'm at the section where all the Continental troops are gearing in to defend New York City, and the British are sending 400 ships up the Hudson to attack New York City. And the thing about it is that at that time, New York City had 20,000 people as their permanent residents. I mean, New York City was smaller than Bowling Green, Ohio at that point. And New York City was surrounded by dense wilderness, dense forest. And so all these letters that you read from, Thomas Paine and George Washington and Alexander Hamilton and, all these founding father letters, these were written by people who were regularly in what we would consider wilderness, just an average drive going from one city to another. They'd be spending hours and sometimes days in deep woods, seeing nature, seeing bears, seeing deer, seeing elk, seeing moose. And that was just the backdrop. That was just the environment. And as we know from experience, from studies, research studies, that living in that kind of environment is really good for your brain. It helps you think. It helps you be more creative. And as you heard in the ad there, that it actually improves your health. It lowers your blood pressure. It increases your blood flow. It basically, it makes you happier if you are around nature, because we're just programmed to live in a natural environment. That's the sort of environment that we are evolutionarily designed to live in. And so these artificial environments that we create that have so few stimulus, that are just, 4 walls, maybe a window, artificial lighting, and your TV set, of course. But those environments are nowhere near as stimulating as the natural environment, where there's literally something happening every second. And just to be there, it's to become more aware of your surroundings, and it's just really good for you. So that was one of our sponsors, and our other sponsor this hour is DeMar Consulting. DeMar Consulting is a computer consulting corporation. They will come to your home, and they will help you with your home computing needs. DeMar Consulting will help you with things like backing up your computer, or let's say you've got a problem with your computer and you need to restore it. They can come and restore your computer. They can help you with viruses. They can help you, let's say your computer's not talking to your printer anymore. I know somebody who had that situation where their computer just stopped talking to their printer, and they just lived with it for a year. If they had to print something, they went into the library because they just never got around to making the call that would get somebody out there and do a 10 or 15 minute repair, and then all of a sudden now your whole system works again. Don't live with things like that. I mean, call a professional. Call the people at DeMar Consulting, and their number there is 419-973-3000. That's 419-973-3000, or you can find them on the web at demarconsulting.com. That's DEMARE, then the word consulting.com. So for all your computer needs, and everyone at DeMar Consulting has a degree in computer science, so you know that they know what they're talking about. All right, well, so there we've heard from our sponsors, and we've had some nice discussion about freedom and what was going on back there in the 1700s. And so now I think it's time to move into the 21st century again, to come back to the present. And I wanted to talk a little bit about a concept called geoengineering. I don't know if you've heard about it. You might have seen proposals. There are right now, it's very blatant that the global warming is happening. I mean, I still run into a few people that say that it's not happening. There's a few people who are denying it. And they say, that the people who are promoting it are all making money off of it. And I have to say that's just not true, that global warming is happening. I mean, literally this past June was the hottest June in the history of record keeping. It's the hottest June that we know of. It's probably the hottest June in something like 20 million years. And the reason is simple. We're putting carbon dioxide into the air. Carbon dioxide holds heat better than nitrogen and oxygen and the other things in the atmosphere. So changing the composition of the atmosphere changes the way it holds heat, and that's warming the globe. So there are people who are saying, oh, well, we could just fix this then. We don't have to change anything. We don't have to stop putting carbon in the air. We could just do some clever technological things. We could just cheat a little bit, and we'll just solve the problem. And these people call themselves geoengineers. And in fact, some universities already offer degrees in geoengineering, which is crazy because geoengineering is an unproven theory right now. But what we keep seeing are these proposals. And one proposal that I've seen this past week that Facebook keeps throwing at me, I see 5 or 10 reprints of this article every time I log on to Facebook. And that is they're proposing these gigantic floating solar farms that would each one would cover hundreds of acres, and they would just be these floating islands of solar panels. And this one specific proposal that they're pushing really hard right now, it would take these gigantic floating solar farms and use them to split water into hydrogen, and then it would take take carbon dioxide out of the seawater and recombine it with the hydrogen to make methane. And then the methane would get harvested and supposedly brought back and put into pipelines and stuff. And to me, this sort of demonstrates the craziness of the whole concept of geoengineering. For one thing, in order to significantly reduce the amount of carbon dioxide, you would need to cover a substantial fraction of the ocean with these gigantic floating solar farms. So the scale is just wrong. And then this particular proposal, because it's saying we're going to take the carbon dioxide out of the seawater to make methane, would then put that carbon right back into the atmosphere once you burn it. And so the ocean is one of the biggest, what they call carbon sinks. In fact, it is the largest carbon sink. That is, when there's more CO2 in the atmosphere than there's supposed to be, a lot of it just gets absorbed into the seawater. And the seawater, so the oceans have been acting as a buffer for us. The oceans have actually reduced the level of global warming by absorbing a lot of this excess carbon that we've been putting into the air. Unfortunately, absorbing this carbon is causing acidification. It's making the oceans become more acidic, and that's killing off a lot of the sea life, because beyond a certain range of acidity, a lot of microplankton can't live, and those plankton, that's the basis of the food chain. The little fish eat the microplankton, the bigger fish eat the little fish, and so on, and the really big fish eat the bigger fish. And so what this proposal would do is it would take the ocean's CO2 buffering ability, it would eliminate it. It would pull the CO2 back out of the ocean and put it back into the air. And if you look at all these carbon dioxide sequestration plans, if you look at all these geoengineering plans, they've all got fatal flaws like that. And of course, the biggest flaw is that they're saying they're going to do this without stopping the carbon. They're saying we're going to keep burning gas, we're going to keep burning oil, keep burning coal, but we're just going to do these clever little fixes, and then that somehow is going to allow us to keep doing things the wrong way. First and foremost, we have to get off of carbon. We have to stop fracking. We have to stop burning coal. We have to stop burning oil. We have to rejigger our transportation systems so so we don't rely on gasoline all the time. And we have to do this right away. Now, some countries, in fact, most of the other countries in the world are heading for this in a big way. In fact, China, I was reading this just this past week, China is putting up wind turbines. They're putting up about, I think it was one wind turbine an hour in China. They're putting up fantastic numbers of solar panels. China has floating solar farms, but their farms, I believe, are just producing hydrogen. They're not doing this weird make methane thing. And, that's great. And so I was reading this article, and of course, like a lot of these articles, at the end, the last line is, but this is only providing 20% of China's power needs right now. Well, 20% of China's power needs is a fantastic amount of power. And I remember people are still in the U.S. saying that we can't even reach percentages like 20%. And of course, what's being proven all over the world, and especially in places like Germany, is that we can go to 100% truly renewable energy, wind and solar and geothermal. And we don't need nukes, and we don't need coal, and we don't even need natural gas. We just need the political will. Technologically, we're there. There's no question about it. Technologically, we have everything we need to make this transition. It's just a question of making it. So these floating islands that I've been seeing on Facebook, that's just one example of geoengineering. And there are some more, but it looks like we may have a caller. My able technician is on the line there. Do we have a caller? All right. Caller, go ahead, and thank you for calling for a green future.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, you're on the air. Thank you. Hi.
Hi. I was calling, I know this might be kind of non sequitur, but I was calling because of recycling plastic. I didn't even know that the Wood County had 12 recycling centers for recycling plastic 1 through 7 and other stuff. And I was kind of wondering if Lucas County had the same thing. Do you know?
No, I don't know, but perhaps one of our listeners does at 866-240-1065. So you're saying Wood County you can recycle pretty much all plastics 1 through 7?
Yeah, 1 through 7. And then so there's 2 parts to that. One, that's really nice. There's a couple parts to this. One, that's really nice. It's getting recycled. At least they're taking it, they're doing something with it. But I don't know what. What I'm trying to say is we take it in and they do something with it, but it'd be really kind of nice if we had a clue what they were recycling, what they were using it to make, and if we could find some way to support that if at all possible, you know what I mean?
Yes, I think you've given me a good topic for a future show there. Because it is impressive. A lot of communities can't do this. And so I'll contact somebody at the Wood County Park District during this coming week and see if we can't get someone on the air to talk about this program. So how do you do this? Do you put it out in your trash or what's the
unfortunately, you can't recycle all of it through your own trash, and that means people have to go out of their way to take it. But a lot of people seem to be really into it because I often will go to recycle my plastics, and the bins are all packed. So lots of people are using this program, even though they have to drive the stuff there themselves. And I do know that there are sometimes shopping bags made out of plastic, like water bottles, and I've heard that there are shoes made out of plastic, like water bottles. But I don't know where to buy them, and it seems like maybe the very people who take in the plastic, i.e. the county programs, might want to pass on some information on what it's the resource to make, so that we can actually buy the end product possibly,
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. Okay, well, definitely we'll get so you take this stuff to bins. You have to drive it there. So where are these bins?
Right, dumpsters, there's dumpsters. There's 12 spots all over, and I don't know the website, but I know that it's listed through the Wood County, I don't know the website, but there's a website that lists the 12 recycling centers all over for Wood County. And I thought, wow, if Wood County can do it, anybody can do it.
Yeah.
Judging by the way things go down here.
Yeah. Well, that's great. That's a little bit of good environmental news there that we can do something with those plastics. Well, I imagine if you're able to pull all your 1 through 7 plastics out of your trash, you're probably not throwing a lot of stuff away, right?
Well, that's part of it. Is if people pull certain things out of their trash that before I didn't even know about it, so I threw all this stuff away. If you pull this out, this reduces our landfills again. If everybody, or as many of us as possibly can do it, it reduces landfill space by quite a bit.
Yeah, and landfills, we take landfills for granted here in the U.S. because we've got so much land, but I know in other places like in Europe, a lot of countries are completely eliminating landfills. They're making all their trash reusable or recyclable, or make the manufacturers responsible for the packaging. So,
well, I think it used to be more like that. It used to be that if you, seems to me, I remember that if you bought bottled water from a place, they were let's say Rite Aid or something like that, or CVS, I thought that they were responsible for taking the bottles back, but I don't know if that, I mean, obviously for someplace like Kroger that used to be true, I think. But, they haven't made the points of distribution responsible for what they sell. They sell, containers, glass containers, plastic containers, but they don't make them responsible for then turning around and disposing properly of it instead of sticking it in the ground, allowing it to float out to the ocean.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, true. All right. Well, thanks very much for calling and telling us about this. And if there's anybody out there who knows about if Lucas County offers anything like this or any of our surrounding counties, because we have the signal goes out quite a ways. What's your county's recycling like, and how can people do it? And I'm sure if it's offered by Wood County, if you go to Wood County's website, you can probably navigate your way to the finding the plastic recyclings. All right. Well, thanks very much for the call.
Sure.
All right. Great.
Have a good day, Joe.
Oh, thank you. And what was your name again?
Carol.
Carol. You too, Carol. Thanks. All right. Well, so that was a nice call from Carol in Wood County. And she reminded me it's time for our letter from the future. Every week we get a letter from the year 2299 from my great-granddaughter, Marie I. And a very short letter this week. Dear great-great-grandpa, just a short note this week because Michael and I are off on a vacation. We are taking a dirigible tour of the Arctic. It's a blue whale watching tour, and we've been following a mother blue whale and her calf as they head for their summer feeding grounds. It's incredibly beautiful sailing over the ocean in our solar-powered cruise dirigible. This is the first time Michael and I have taken vacation since we started working on the project to eliminate your time's nuclear wastes. Normally, people in 2299 take at least 3 months of vacation every year, but we've been working way too hard. Longer letter next week. Love, Marie I. So, very short letter for my great-great-granddaughter. And, she's writing back in time, and she's writing from a time when we figured out all this stuff. I mean, just the idea of a solar-powered cruise dirigible. I mean, right now what we have in the 21st century are oil-powered cruise ships that are essentially, I've heard them described as floating landfills because they put tons and tons of pollution into the air, and they also some of them dump their wastes directly into the ocean, and so they're literally polluting the very natural world that people are paying money to come to go look at off these cruise ships. And there actually is a movement. There is some environmental opposition to the whole idea of cruise liners. What do you think? Have you ever been on a cruise? Did it take you to see some natural area? Give us a call, 866-240-1065. This is the season of vacation here in the U.S., especially right around the 4th of July weekend when so many people take extra time off in order to get that extra long weekend. And so unfortunately, a lot of us are going back to work tomorrow. But we've got one more day, and we've got a few more minutes. We've got time for one more call at 866-240-1065. Did you go on a cruise this year? Are you planning to go on a cruise? Where would you like to go on a cruise? Give us a call, 866-240-1065. Let's see, just a couple other things I wanted to talk about before we run out of time here. One is an update on the House Bill 6 situation. Kind of a positive development on House Bill 6, a little tiny hopeful sign, and that is that the Senate has not yet voted on it. The Senate has not yet decided it, which is a good sign because First Energy had given the Ohio State Senate, the entire Ohio legislature and the governor, they dictated to them, they said, you must make your decision by June 30th because we have to go buy some more nuclear fuel, and we have to put our order in time. And if you don't decide by June 30th, we are just going to close the plants. That's it. End of discussion. And the Ohio State Legislature did not make the decision by June 30th. And guess what? First Energy sent a letter saying, well, we're going to probably, if whatever you do decide to do it, we have not finalized. In other words, First Energy was bluffing. First Energy did not mean it when they said, if you don't give us the money by June 30th, we're going to close the plants. They sent a letter to the legislature saying, anytime if you give us our money, we will go ahead and keep the plants open, so that their deadline. And just think about that for a minute there. What the situation was a private corporation which has a monopoly on electricity, because the government has said we can't have lots of different electricity supply companies running around, everybody stringing their own wires and getting in each other's ways. So they have a monopoly given to them by the government, and they used this monopoly to turn around and dictate to the government and said, you've got to give us our $1 billion by June 30th, or we're going to shut the plants down. And so it was good that the state legislature did not meet First Energy's deadline. But then, of course, it turned out, as so many times in the past, First Energy was lying, because they are not shutting the plants. They're not just, okay, plants are shut down now. No, they have sent a letter saying that whenever you give us our $1 billion, then we can just turn right around. So it's right now the bill is in the Senate. It's still in committee. The committee got 20 different proposed amendments after their last round of hearings, and so far they have dealt with 2 of them. But the greater budget crisis, which has paralyzed the state of Ohio, kind of came over and has pushed House Bill 6 to a back burner right now. But keep the pressure up. We have to keep letting our senators know what we think about this. So, all right, well, that's our show. It's been a pleasure. Thanks to Carol for the call, and thanks to our brave Continental soldiers back in 1776 who won our freedoms for us. This is Joe DeMar signing off.